Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Okay, today we're uncovering a hidden medical privacy threat that honestly sounds like it's straight out of a sci-fi movie. We put so much trust in our medical systems, right? We just assume our personal data is locked down and totally anonymous when it's used for research. But what if the actual physical shape of your biology could completely give away your identity?
I mean, could a total stranger recognize you just from a scan of your brain? Most of us would probably say, no way. It's just a bunch of gray and white blobs. But, we aren't just looking at flat 2D X-rays anymore. Today's structural MRI scans capture these incredibly high-resolution, full 3D models of your entire head. And when you reconstruct that data, your face, the actual outer layer of your head, comes into incredibly sharp focus.
Okay, let's dive into this. 83%. Yeah, you heard that right. In a recent experiment run by the Mayo Clinic, researchers took 3D renders made directly from structural MRI scans and literally just fed them into facial recognition software. And the AI? It successfully matched an absolutely mind-blowing 83% of those brain scan renders to actual photographs of the patients. So, as scan quality and AI facial recognition get better and better, the risk of accidentally exposing your identity just by sharing your brain scan is frankly skyrocketing.
So, let's look at Section 1, the MRI privacy problem.
Look, we absolutely need large-scale medical data sharing if we're going to advance neuroscience, cure diseases, and really understand the human mind. But legally, and ethically for that matter, doing this without putting patient identities at risk is a massive, massive hurdle. Here in the US, under HIPAA regulations, and honestly under similar privacy laws globally, data is only considered de-identified if full-face photographs and any comparable images are stripped out. Now, text stuff like your name or your birth date, super easy to delete. But a 3D structural rendering of your actual face baked right into your neuroimaging data, that is undeniably a comparable image. So before researchers can openly release these data sets to the global scientific community, they literally have to digitally scrub the faces right off the scans.
Which brings us to Section 2, how exactly do we hide those faces?
Well, scientists and software engineers have come up with a few different tricks to anonymize these scans, but spoiler alert, they are definitely not all created equal. You basically have two main approaches. On one hand, you have facial blurring. This is where the voxels, and you can just think of voxels as 3D pixels, that make up the facial features are sort of smoothed out or blurred. Sounds great, right? It preserves a ton of anatomical data, but there is a huge, fatal flaw here. AI is now smart enough to reverse that blurring. Yep, with the right model, someone could just unblur the face and recreate the original scan. So it's super high risk and kind of useless for actual privacy. Now, on the other hand, we have defacing. This method basically takes a digital scalpel and permanently deletes those facial voxels entirely. Because the data is literally gone, it cannot be reverse engineered, period. It's irreversible and incredibly safe. So for the rest of this explainer, we're going to focus purely on defacing as our ultimate Goldilocks solution.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly what we're talking about. You can literally see the physical cuts made by two different defacing algorithms here. The profile of the patient, completely gone. The software figured out exactly where the nose, the mouth, and the eyes were supposed to be, and just turned those voxels into an empty black void. I know it looks a little dramatic, maybe even a bit creepy, but it is incredibly effective.
All right, moving on to Section 3, the Great Defacing Showdown.
To find the absolute best privacy tool out there, researchers put together this massive, multi-site comparison of publicly available defacing algorithms. Think of it kind of like a high-stakes sporting event, but, for medical software. They pulled 300 highly detailed structural MRI scans from 3 major neuroimaging databases. And they didn't just test one type of person. This covered a huge age range. We're talking everyone from 3-year-old toddlers all the way up to 85-year-old seniors. It included healthy folks and patients with conditions ranging from autism spectrum disorder to Alzheimer's. Then they took these 300 incredibly diverse scans and ran them through 6 different defacing programs.
Now, to actually win this showdown, an algorithm had to pass a super strict pass-fail system based on 2 very simple rules. Rule number 1, completely remove the face. No identifiable features can be left behind whatsoever. Rule number 2, do not remove any of the actual brain tissue. Now, you might be wondering, why not just use skull stripping tools to isolate the brain and just delete the rest of the head? Well, skull stripping actually got disqualified from winning here because it deletes really valuable non-brain data. We're talking about crucial stuff like skull landmarks needed for EEG alignment or total cerebrospinal fluid volumes. So the winning software had to carefully chop off just the face while leaving the entire rest of the head perfectly intact. Let's get into the results in Section 4, the the best defacing software.
So the tension is building. Out of the 6 algorithms they tested, and these are programs with names like Deep Defacer, MRI Deface, and QuickShear, which one actually managed to perfectly balance privacy and data preservation across all those totally different ages and head shapes?
While the clear champions of the showdown were AFNI_Refacer, sitting at a really impressive 89% success rate, and PyDeface right behind it at 83%. But what's super fascinating about these results is how much their success actually depended on the specific age of the patient they were processing. For instance, the main time AFNI_Refacer failed was with the very youngest dataset, kids aged 3 to 20. Meanwhile, PyDeface really struggled with the oldest cohort, the folks aged 44 to 85. So it really just goes to show that no single algorithm is absolutely perfect for every single head shape out there. But still, these two, vastly superior to the rest of the pack.
But then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, we get this shockingly low number, 39%. Yeah, this was the honestly abysmal success rate of the loser, an algorithm called QuickShear. It drastically failed the main objective. It frequently failed to remove the eyes, and sometimes it literally left the mouths completely intact in the 3D renders. And look, if your privacy software leaves the eyes and mouth behind, it is entirely defeating the whole purpose of medical privacy.
Next up, Section 5, beating facial recognition. Okay, so the top algorithms proved they could effectively chop the faces off the scans. But the researchers needed to be absolutely certain that this would actually trick human eyes and computer AI. Now, what's really interesting about this result is the massive gray blocks. That represents the human facial recognition test. The researchers basically showed human raters the Deface 3D renders and asked them to try and match them back to photographs. For the original, non-deface scans, humans correctly identified them the majority of the time. But for the defaced ones, that huge chunk of gray represents all the times the human raters just clicked "can't identify." They literally didn't even attempt to guess, because the algorithm had so thoroughly destroyed the facial structure. The scans were rendered completely 100% unidentifiable.
And on the rare occasions when human raters did try to take a guess, they had to resort to some pretty sneaky strategies. I mean, normally, you look at a face, you look at the nose and eyes, right? But since the winning software completely deleted those, raters said they started hunting for residual features. 56% of the time, they were squinting trying to find remnants of eyebrows, and 44% of the time, they just tried to match the overall shape of the skull to the photograph. But even using those clever little workarounds, their correct identification rate was absolutely abysmal. Often, it was literally no better than just randomly guessing.
Okay, but what about the computer AI? The researchers used OpenCV, which is an open-source computer vision library, to hunt for faces in these deface scans. And the good news is, the AI was mostly fooled. The confidence levels plummeted way below the threshold you'd need to actually detect a face. But hilariously, the AI did occasionally get a little confused by the internal anatomy that was left behind. Because the skin and nose were totally gone, the AI would sometimes look at the raw exposed remnants of eye sockets or large tendons or blood vessels inside the head, and it would falsely flag them as a face. The algorithms had so deeply altered the natural structure of the head that the computer vision essentially started hallucinating features that just weren't there.
Which brings us to Section 6. Does defacing ruin data? And here is the final plot twist. Okay, we know defacing protects privacy, but does it ruin the data? That is the single biggest fear for medical researchers, because if permanently deleting pixels from the front of the head accidentally messes up the volume calculations for the rest of the brain, well, the data becomes totally useless for science. But here is the brilliant news for the scientific community. Defacing is incredibly safe for the data pipeline. When researchers ran the deface scans through their standard processing pipelines and compared them to the original untouched scans, there was less than a 1% variation in global brain measures. Things like total brain volume or cortical thickness barely changed at all. I mean, that is well within the normal margin of error you'd get just by converting a file from one type to another. So, the integrity of the medical data remained completely safe and totally viable for future scientific analysis.
So if you happen to be a researcher watching this, what's your actionable takeaway here? Which tool should you actually integrate into your lab today? Well, this summarizes the practical stats perfectly. If you want the absolute highest success rate, AFNI_Refacer is definitely your tool. It takes roughly 13 to 30 minutes per scan and runs through the AFNI specialized neuroimaging software suite. Now, if you want a really fantastic balance of high accuracy but with more speed, PyDeface takes only 2 to 10 minutes and runs super easily right in Python. And while QuickShear only takes about a single minute to run, remember our showdown. Its 39% success rate means it is just way too risky to rely on for actual patient privacy.
We've seen how a few lines of code can permanently slice away our digital faces, safely decoupling our true identities from our biology. But it does leave us with a pretty provocative thought. Right now, simply removing a face is enough to trick an AI. But as machine learning gets exponentially smarter and eventually begins to recognize the incredibly unique fingerprint-like folds of our internal brain matter itself, how else will we need to protect the ghosts in our medical machines? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep your curiosity focused.